Welcome to the Edgevana Podcast, where we illuminate subjects in the IT infrastructure space. Get ready to hear some amazing insights from outstanding individuals that will change the way you think about IT. And now, here's your host, Mark Thiele.
Ben, thank you to this second episode of the Edgevana Podcast. Really appreciate you joining all the way from Australia.
Thanks, Mark. Great to be here.
Yeah. So how's the visit home going?
Cold. We had on the weekend one of the coldest days ever. It's snow in Canberra, which is in New South Wales, and yeah, it's pretty crazy stuff. So
Wow.
it's big difference from New York where I was melting.
Well, no kidding. And most of the Western United States where they've been suffering from incredible heat wave, and you've probably seen the news about the fires in California, et cetera. Yeah, it's been terrible.
It's unfortunate. It's becoming a yearly event, right? And we had them here in January when I was back as well.
I remember.
And
I had friends. I had friends in the Brisbane and general area around Brisbane that had to evacuate. Luckily, nobody lost their home, but it's pretty bad.
It really is.
Man, well, I'm glad you can make it. I'm glad you're safe and things are going okay, and family's doing well.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. It's obviously great to be here and catch up and spend some time with the boys and just integrate into their lives a bit. It's cool.
Right. That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. So let's. I've been curious. I've known you for a long time. I mean, you and I have been chasing each other around at speaking events and grabbing lunch here and there when we have a chance or a drink. And it's been a long time. I mean, I don't know when we first met, but it's been at least 10 years, right?
Yeah, which is scary.
It is.
It still blurs in. Yeah,
it goes so fast. And frankly, Ben, I'm disappointed. I mean, I consider you not only, I'm not disappointed that I've known you for 10 years. I'm disappointed in myself.
I've heard that before.
Well, there is that. Let's not get into the ugly stuff.
No.
But, I'm disappointed in myself in the sense that I feel like Ben's actually a friend. He's not just a work acquaintance or somebody I met on the circuit and had a beer over as we tried to sell each other something. We both came as practitioners, which was a great start. But, truthfully, I really know very little about how Ben came to be. I mean, you've got kind of a who's who of jobs you've taken. Working for companies like Red Bull and Box and Oath and Verizon, et cetera, et cetera. And so I wanted to spend most of this half hour getting to know Ben a little bit more and letting the world get to know Ben a little bit more, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, it's probably my least favorite topic, but yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to dig it out of you, and we're going to pay you double. You're going to get twice as much as we were going to give you in this podcast.
All right.
Awesome.
So where do we start?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, there's a lot of places to start. But I assume you weren't in the U.S. to begin with when you started your IT.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about how you started in IT and how you ended up from that starting point to the United States.
Yeah, kind of. So I had a very non-traditional entry point. I fell into IT. I'd done a bit of computing through school. I had the Commodore 64 and, messed around, tell how old I am. But I was never the computer guy or anything like that. I was a musician actually all through high school.
How funny.
And then I didn't go to college. I just didn't have money, started to work, and just kept, life got in the way of my musician career. And then ended up working in hotels. And I was at this hotel and I was an accountant, actually. I was working as an accountant. And oh my God, it was horrible. But I was helping the IT guy.
Yep.
And he had a family emergency, had to leave, and I just went to the controller, and this was a hired hotel, and said, "Can I have a go at this?" And he's like, "Yep." So I was thrown in the deep end, 24/7 hotel operation at a 5-star hotel.
Wow.
And I just learned on the job. Back then, we were CC mail and RS6000s and all this fun stuff, Novell networks, right? Yep. So I just learned it all on the job and kept going from there. I took a year off actually in 2000 to run the Olympic volleyball team, beach volleyball.
Oh, wow.
To do.
Nice.
So that was I got tapped on the shoulder just through a network. I'd been involved in volleyball and was never really a good player, but good enough. So I spent a year following the beach volleyball tour around, which was pretty cool. Went to the Olympics. We won a gold medal there, which was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Decided I didn't want to be in sports. It's an interesting business, and went back to IT. And then I was back in hotels still. Then I got wanted to make the big move to Sydney. So in Australia, I was in Adelaide, which is a reasonably small town, but good million odd people. And I actually went to Canberra, and then I was like, I want to hit the big smoke and go to Sydney, and applied and got this job offer at Red Bull. Red Bull's actually what got me to the US. So I spent a couple of years in Australia, and I ended up running Australia, New Zealand, and then they gave me kind of like the Southern Hemisphere. So I had 8 or 9 countries, and I would literally fly around the world. Headquarters was in Austria, just out of Salzburg.
Yep.
Fantastic couple of years flying around the world. I guess this was early 2000s. The big thing I noticed back then was the commoditization of IT.
Right.
So we were, desktops and servers and putting VMware infrastructure and all this amazing, really cool stuff back then. But it dawned on me that you weren't going to differentiate a company by what PC you gave someone.
Yeah.
Macs weren't a thing back then, right? So I got into the software side of it, and it was about 20-30% of my role. And this job in the US came up, which was 100% software. And so I talked the director into bringing me on. And that was 2006. So moved to the US and had a team of 1 and everything outsourced to Wipro.
Really?
It was really kind of interesting. And the US Red Bull was 50% of the global business. So it was we had a big stick, which was good. So we could be independent a little bit from Austria, and we built solutions. And so I had to work out project management and database stuff and BI. I had I built a BI team and just built it all up. We insourced everything and built up the application development environment. Just went through there for a number of years. And then 9 years with Red Bull. So it was a good haul. And I think I cut my teeth in all the different areas.
Yep.
And then, 2008 hit. It was a pretty rough year for everyone globally. And, Red Bull survived. Everyone wanted to drink sugar water. So that was good. But then we went through a lot of change, and a lot of people left. And one guy left, our head of sales, and he went to Pabst Blue Ribbon. And he rings me up and he said, Ben, you need to come and help. Well, we need some dire assistance here. So I went over to Pabst, and that was my first CIO gig. And it's really cool because it was small. You see, and there's all these different size companies, but it was nice and small, 15 odd people. And you go from a massive company like Red Bull. By the end, we were about 2,000 people globally. By the end, we were about 30.
Wow.
And, so you've seen, you go through is like everything just slows down. Now you have committees. Now, you've got CFOs that really, really care, and, all this stuff.
Right.
And so I came out of that, got into Pabst, and this was 2011, I think. Everything was literally sitting in a server room, they called it, in a strip mall in San Antonio.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. And I got in there and I'm like, all right, so where's our backup? Well, there's one line out there, and if Farmer Joe goes and pulls it up, we're in trouble. And everything was going through this little server room. And so it was a fun ride. We spent a year, and I literally turned the server room into a meeting room, and everyone loved it because they got their biggest boardroom they've ever had. Nice. We threw everything out to the cloud.
Yep.
Actually did some little stuff with Rackspace because we had some ugly old proprietary stuff. And yeah, that was kind of my first big cloud push. It was fun. I still love it today. I spent 3 days with my data center guy unracking servers and racks and throwing out 12,000 pounds of equipment.
Wow.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah.
So it went from there, and then I'd been talking to Aaron Levy actually for a number of years. Back at Red Bull, we built the first iPad app back then with Box in the background, and iPads had just come out, and we were revolutionizing and innovating in our sales area. And you know how sales people, they walk around with this big book, and in CPG space, it's a big thick book, plastic binder. And they've got all the deals and everything in there. We made that into an iPad app and gave them these CRM functions and everything. So I'd known Aaron for a number of years. And he called me up and said, okay. And I've been saying, do you want a CIO? Do you want a CIO? And they weren't ready. But just before IPO, got the call up. And, once again, it was a chance to go to Silicon Valley and, the mecca of IT and, see the sausage factory. So I did that, and that was a bit of fun. It's really interesting, and I think everyone in their careers need to do this, see different environments. And that's, and you've seen that as there's this thing, and this is what I love about IT. There's a consistent thing that we can do in any industry. It all applies. The challenge for the CIO, though, is, and that's back to the commoditization side. We can do that in any industry.
Right.
Right. The challenge of the CIO, though, is how do we make money in those different industries? And that's that big difference you get by jumping to different spaces. And that's the challenge I saw, is I understood CPG, route to market, trade promotions, all the stuff we need to do to make money selling Red Bull or beer.
Yep.
It's all right, well, how does a SaaS company make money? And how does IT impact that? So that was a fantastic challenge there. But then once again, you get into the startup space, IT's got no money. Everything goes to product. And that's right. It's the right answer, so you get different challenges.
Yeah.
But they didn't hold back either. It was coming out of CPG, the way we spent money at the startup was somewhat refreshing because your technology is your factory. Right. You want your engineers on the best Mac and, with the best tools, and CPG is how much is that Windows laptop? Can we get it for $100 cheaper? And they're just different conversations. So it was really great. See the different industries. And then I got to Yahoo after that. And I was actually mutual friend, Mike Kyle. We were at a conference, and he was telling me about his challenges at Yahoo, and I was intrigued. So I rang him and said, bring me on. He's like, really? You'd lead Box? I'm like, yeah, I want to get to scale. And that was that next challenge in the career, is I'd worked, Red Bull 2,000 to 30,000.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, you don't see the forest for the trees in that situation. You're just doing it.
Right.
But then plopped into a 20,000 person organization and a 20-year-old company that was backwards from an IT perspective, and you wouldn't think that in the middle of Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
But you've probably seen it. There's just a lot of legacy.
No,
and
you definitely have.
Yeah. So that was once again the next challenge. Is all right, well, wow, we've got money. We've got too many people. And we've got an aging infrastructure and organization and how people think and the whole gamut. So started and led a big transformation there. And we were almost, you're never done, but we're at a really good position. We're probably at the 80% done. Yep. And then we got the acquisition. And we merged AOL and Yahoo together. Could not have been more similar companies. From an infrastructure perspective, even products. But it was like, okay, now it's a do-over. And they asked me to lead that, that's another fun story we can get into later if you want. But yeah, and so I guess I ended up really, if you think about Yahoo, was like 5 years with the acquisition, which was a long haul. And we got to a point just late last year and 2+ years into the merger. And a year before that, I was like, okay, what's next? And we worked for a while on what was next, and none of that panned out. So I think that's one of the hardest things in your career is I could have stuck around like they wanted me to stick around,
right.
Which is good. It's nice. But I'd actually spent a number of years building up a bench, and I had 2 very good leaders that were ready for the next step.
Right.
And also a changing organization. And I think there's this, it's a little bit like sports teams. And you see the coaches, right? They can take their team so far, and then you need someone different.
Right.
And I recognized I was the wrong coach for the next phase. They were going into. And it's hard to admit that, but I was like, no, I think what I've done, and I have a formula and it's worked. The next phase that you guys need to go into, I think you need some fresh thinking. So I got my guy in to succeed me, which was great. And the other person, she was also ready, but she was the wrong person for where they were going as well, which is also interesting because they wanted her, and I'm like, she's wrong. And I advised her to get a job outside of the company, and she did. And she's like going, great guts. It's amazing to see these people flourish that you've been working with and mentoring for a long time. So yeah, timing was right. And I'm trying to work out if I'm in pre-retirement or a gap year. Yeah.
Well, I mean, certainly you could argue that this is a good year to have a gap year since, we've had everything except for an asteroid hit the planet, and now they're planning on one of those too, maybe.
Exactly.
So literally the world is a mess. So if you're going to skip a year, this is the one. But fascinating story. And, in the maybe one of the reasons why I've always liked you so much is that there's, without knowing it, there's a lot of your growing up history in the technology space that parallels mine. And this isn't an interview for me, but, and so I don't want to go into all that detail, but I sort of, same thing. I accidentally got into IT, literally. A lady that ran the data center said, Mark, we're trying to hire computer operators upstairs. You should come apply. And my answer to her, I was joking, but I said, I don't know how to spell computer operator. And she took a chance on me and hired me, and it was all downhill from a growth and experience perspective after that. But yeah, from working in small startups where everything is a rush, but there's never any money for it, to working in a startup that's actually growing and printing money like it's a Colombian drug dealer. To working at an older company that's got a lot of great history, but whose direction is as easy to change as 4 Titanics tied to each other. I've been in all of those, and so I can definitely sympathize with some of the directions that your career took, et cetera. So thank you for that history, and certainly I feel like I know you better, and I appreciate that. And so we only have a few minutes left. We've got about 10 minutes left. If you don't mind, I want to ask you a couple of questions that sort of relate to your history, but about the path for a CIO, right? Because like you, I don't have a degree. I wasn't the guy that tore apart PCs and had email domains named after me and so on and so forth. I wasn't that guy, right? But does that preclude you from a good, IT future? So part of what I want to ask you, and maybe it's kind of a theme for the next 2 or 3 questions that I ask you, is the right IT path more about knowing yourself than it is about whether you have any preconceived notion or capability associated with a particular job, right? And for me, a lot of the choices I made, and it sounds like to some degree the same thing as you, a lot of the choices I made were about, well, if I looked into the future, would that be me? Do I see myself being the best at that? And if I couldn't say yes to that answer, then I knew that I needed to find a different path within the IT family, right? So thinking about that, lessons for, for the new CIO or for somebody that wants to be a CIO, do you think your first CIO job, generally speaking, I would assume that the first CIO job is a stretch job, but not always, right? A lot of times you're an IT manager and the company grows from 5 people in IT to 15 and you become a CIO. But,
right.
Do you see it as this should be a stretch job, something where, you're really having to stretch your own capabilities into this new position?
Yes. And I think this is a fundamental for any role, especially when I'm looking at leaders. And there's probably a lot of people argue against it, but it's a bit of a sink or swim. But I think that people achieve more if they're stretched. Yeah. And if they're just a little, and once again, it's probably a lot because that's how I work. I've got to be just a little bit like, oh my, this is going to be tough to really pull my finger out and like, I'm not going to sink. Yeah. And I think that is, it's the best test of yourself, and to stretch. If you've got it easy, you're not learning. And that's probably the biggest thing, is you've got to be learning and okay to make mistakes. And of course, the higher you get up, the more costly the mistakes are. And that's always a challenge. Yeah. But no, I think you need to be just that, not quite sure if you can do it.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I mean, I always felt like if I wasn't a little bit uncomfortable, and or nervous, then something was wrong, right? Because if you're nervous, that just means that your adrenaline and your reflexes are pumped up, and you're more likely to be trying, right? So I totally agree with you. Yeah. Yeah. And so, thinking about that, and this sort of relates to the question about right? And I've always felt it was important to have a good idea of what your own gaps are. And so, for you personally, did you have any particular things to help you with self-awareness or to help you realize that, hey, just because I'm the leader of this band doesn't necessarily mean that I have to be the best player or act like I'm the best player. I should understand where my gaps are. If my gap is that I'm not great at organization, or my gaps that I'm not great at understanding data centers, or whatever the case may be. Did you have any tricks for identifying those things for yourself?
Yeah, the best thing you can do is put people around you that will remind you of your gaps.
Yeah, exactly.
And don't be offended by it or threatened by it. And I had a fantastic team, and there's definitely a couple of individuals that would, they'd be pretty quickly like, hey, Ben, you need to do X. I'd be like, oh, really? Yeah. And my chief of staff, she was amazing. And she would just be constantly just like, okay, we need to do this and this. And I know you don't like this, but you need to do this. And I'm, okay, I know, I get it. And so you've got to put people around you and don't be scared. Like, you need a diverse leadership group that are comfortable, and you have to, as a leader, you have to create an environment that people are comfortable to come to you and tell you what's happening, good and bad.
Right.
That's the number one thing you can do. And there's all this self-help and everything. And, I like the strengths finder and processes like that.
Yeah.
But the right leaders around you, you're going to know where your weak spots are.
Yeah. Yeah. And it seems funny. This sort of reminds me of some conversations we've had in the past. And it's so often that some of the simplest things that we can do from a logical standpoint, from an actual complexity of action standpoint, are the ones that we resist the most. And so, when I say that, I'm thinking specifically on everything you just said. All of it is important, and I think I agree with all of it. But the one thing that is the easiest and simplest of that whole activity was let your freaking people talk to you.
Right.
And really talk to you. And sometimes that means they're talking to you because their dog is in the vet and about their dog dying. And other times they're talking to you because they really feel like they can't get their work done because of X, Y, or Z. Or other times they're talking to you about some great idea, but maybe they just didn't feel comfortable putting it on paper, or maybe they weren't even thinking that the company would be interested. And if you don't have those conversations, you just don't freaking know. And how can a leader be successful when you don't know, right?
Right.
So yeah, I just think that's one of the most important things. And at HP, it was part of their mantra when I worked there. Was the open door policy, right? Now, just because they had for mean that everybody lived to it, but I got lucky, and I spent 9 years with the same leader as I went through progressive positions, and he did as well, that I never even thought about it. I realized after I left HP that I had something special, because I never had to question. I never had to think about it. If he wasn't on the phone or out of this, I could walk in and start talking to him about anything. I wish I had recognized at the time how much of a value I derived, because it really was amazing to my ability to be successful, and frankly, for my ability to help the organization be more successful, right? So, all right. So we're about to wrap up. I want to ask you one more question, and then maybe leave you with, if say something to the audience in particular about this subject or anything else that might be going on. But you touched on this earlier. Do you think that there's a similar to the CEO role? Do you that many people anyway, maybe in case everybody's following along with Mark Thiele, who thinks everybody understands what he's saying all the time, people believe that there are CEOs for company type. Is it that's just steady state? Is it a company that's really large? Is it a company that's growing really fast? Is it has to go through all time, and there are different CEOs for those roles? And I think I believe that to some degree. But do you see that for the CIO role? And if so, what are some of the key kind of CEO fits as you see them?
Yeah, there's absolutely different types of CIOs, and look, we make it very simple and say there's transformational and then infrastructure people, and at that basic level there is, and they're generally lower down in the organization. But if you're trying to move an organization forward, then you need a forward-thinking leader, CIO, CDO, CTO, okay? And it doesn't matter what the title is. People have different strengths, and you've got to understand how they match to your organization and where you're trying to go. If you're trying to play it really safe, and because you're pumping out dividend every quarter and we've got to maintain that, we can't really innovate too much because we don't want to risk, and you don't want a really cowboy crash bang CIO in there who's going to shake it all up, because they're not going to fit, and the organ rejection will be real, but then the flip of that, if you are trying to change things up, you need a change agent, and that goes with any leader, not just CIOs. You've got to find that right fit culturally, and understand where the organ rejection is going to happen. Or maybe you do want, you're turning over a leadership group and you want new ideas, and you start moving forward. But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, that totally makes sense. So, Ben, before I send us into our wrap up, is there any final thing? This sounds like I'm asking you, what do you want? You want surf and turf before I walk you down the green mile and plug you into
Yeah.
the. Really, just I mean, considering what's going on in the world today, maybe, or just a single lesson that you think everybody should know about Ben's life in technology. Anything you'd like to share?
No, I talked enough about me. I think the the key things, there's two key areas I think as leaders and CIOs. Um, you're a business leader first as a CIO,
Yep.
and that's critical when you're at the C level. And yes, your skill and deep knowledge in technology, and that's there, but you're a business leader, and you have to understand how to talk the language of business. So for
Right.
new CIOs coming in, you don't go back on your comfort spot of how many servers in a rack and all these wonderful things you understand, and you've got to understand the language of business.
Right.
That's number one. Number two, it is a cliche, but your team is critical, and the leadership team you build is a reflection of yourself,
Yep.
and will ultimately be your success or failure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you have to have a diverse leadership group, and it's hard, and you've got to push it, right? Yep. It's not hard to do, but it is hard to persist and stand by your morals and what you need to bring everyone along, if that makes sense. I know it's a bit contradictory, but it can be straight. Yeah, it can be straightforward, but you do have to persist, and that diversity will, and it's not just male, female. That's where everyone gets all they're ticking boxes. It's a lot deeper than that. And then once you have a diverse team, you've got to include them. This is where everyone, it's like, oh, they look at these wonderful stats, but it's like you're inviting them to dinner and you don't let them eat.
Right.
You've got to include everyone and listen to diverse opinions, and you'll move a lot further.
I was just as kind of a final word. I was really surprised one time, fairly early in my leadership career, and I asked my management team, the team that of direct reports that reported to me. I think I was like in a senior director role or something, and I asked them to. First time I'd had a bunch of other managers report to me, in other words, and I was going to send out an email that was about the IT organization and many things that were going on, including responding to some bad stuff that had happened. And I sent my email around and said, hey, folks, please read this and make sure you guys are okay with this. Make sure I'm not missing anything. Make sure I'm not saying something that would put somebody in the incorrect light or whatever. And one of the new people that it hadn't been working for me very long at that point came in and said, oh my God, Mark, this is the best thing ever. I can't believe you are willing to allow us to edit your words before they go out. That makes me feel so much more comfortable. And just, to kind of highlight your point is that involvement, as Steve Jobs is fond of having said, hire smart people and let them fucking work. Pardon my French.
Right.
But
no, absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome.
Absolutely.
Well, Ben, this has been fantastic. Not just because I consider you a friend and it was great to see you and chat with you, but especially to learn about your background and to find out that I'm not one of the only weirdos as far as the IT career is concerned, because I definitely took the less trodden path to get to where I am. Yep. And so if people want to keep up with what Ben Haines is doing, what's the best way to follow you?
I think Twitter right now. I'm about to ramp up the what's next and start the job search. But Twitter's probably the best place. Coming out of my little semi-retirement practice.
So Twitter for Ben, in case you don't know, and you should follow Ben, is B Haines 0.
That's the one.
And thank you again, and thank you everyone for listening. This podcast is from Edgevana. I'm your host, Mark Thiele. And you can find me on Teely10 on Twitter. And certainly I spend a lot of time creating discussions or arguments, depending on your perspective, on LinkedIn, where we find a great platform for actually challenging assumptions on a regular basis. So again, Ben, thank you very much. And everyone else, thank you for joining.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you for listening to the Edgevana Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast listening app or on YouTube. To learn more, visit www.edgevana.com. Thanks for listening, and be sure to join us on our next episode.